We just read in Exodus 12 that, hey, no uncircumcised male shall eat of the Passover. They shall be cut off from Israel. So it's a legitimate question. It's a legitimate dilemma. That's the question, and that's what Paul's dealing with here. Now, why all of a sudden is Paul saying that, hey, in Acts 15 they said, hey, let's not bother them with that, when it did say in the Torah that needed to do that. So where's the answer to that? So we're going to get to that. So can you all see that the same issue here in Acts 15 is being dealt with in Colossians? Now, then he says, you were buried with him in baptism, wherein also you are risen with him through the faith and the operation of God who hath raised him from the dead. And you being undead in your sins and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he hath quickened together with him, having forgiven you all your trespasses, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us. Now, what handwriting of ordinance was against the Gentile people? Was this God's law he was referring to? Or was it what was referred to in Acts 10? Let's go to Acts 10 real quick. Acts 10 and verse, I believe it was Acts 10. Yes, in verse 28. Does somebody have a mic? I don't want to do all the reading because I want you to read the scriptures here so you can begin to build your defense and a case to answer this question that many churches have lumped this specific law that Paul's dealing with. They've lumped the whole law, the whole Torah, all the commandments into and said that's what Paul's dealing with. No, it's one specific law, and we're going to get to that. So somebody read verse 28 in Acts 10.
Just 28?
Just 28.
And he said to them, you yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or to visit anyone under the nations. But God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean.
And then verse 34 and 35.
So Peter opened his mouth and said, truly I understand that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him.
Okay, so this law, these ordinances that was against the Gentiles was what Peter's describing right here. It was unlawful in their tradition, in their custom, for anybody, or that it was unlawful for a man that is a Jew to keep company or come unto one of another nation. That was a wall. That was a separation. Okay, so it was very difficult for them with that understanding. How do we take the gospel message to the Gentiles? Okay, and so in the Acts 15 issue was the main crux of what was creating that wall. So he said in Colossians chapter 2 that, let me go back there, that he said that you are circumcised with a circumcision made without hands. Verse 14, where we just read, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to the cross. Having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphantly over them in it. And then verse 16, he says, let no man therefore judge you. Who is he talking to again here? The Gentiles. That's the audience. He says, let no man judge you in meat, or in drink, or in respect or honor of a holy day, or of the new moon or the Sabbath. And this word judge, if you look at it, it's in the context of condemning. So a Gentile believer who was uncircumcised, Paul's saying, you've been circumcised with a circumcision made without hands. And so let no man condemn you for coming and participating in these festivals, the new moons and the Sabbaths, in an physically uncircumcised state. Let no man condemn you for that. That's the context here in Colossians chapter 2. All right. Now, And there's another place where it mentions it, how he broke down that middle wall of partition. And I'm trying to remember what text that was in, but it's. Thank you. You want to? Thank you. Good to have Bible scholars in here. Ephesians chapter 2. Let's see. Okay, go ahead and read. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Ephesians 2:14. For he himself is our peace, who has made both one, and has broken down the middle wall of separation. You want me to read 15?
Yes, yeah.
Having abolished in his flesh the enmity, that is, the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace, and that he might reconcile them both to God in one body through the cross, thereby putting to death the enmity.
You might as well read on down.
And he came and preached peace to you who are afar off, and to those who are near. For through him we both have access by one Spirit to the Father. Now, therefore, you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom the whole building, being fitted together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built together for a dwelling place of God in the Spirit.
Okay. So are we getting a picture here that Paul's message to the Gentiles are, you are part of the body. You are part of Israel. You've been grafted in. And this issue in Acts 15 that this sect was promoting is not necessary. Now, but we're going to get to answering did something change? Because we know that Yeshua didn't change anything in the Torah. Okay, so we have to understand, how do we answer that dilemma? Okay, Paul answers it in the book of Galatians. And so we're going to go there now. And yeah, go ahead and ask a question. Grab the mic. Are we recording this, Sean? Yeah. So this is live? Yeah, this is live stream. So.
Now, I believe the original commandment concerning the Gentiles, doing with the Gentiles, had to do with their religion and not their birth, right? I mean, proselytized Gentiles were accepted from the very beginning, right? So it was to my understanding that the concept of Gentiles being common or unclean just because of their birth was something that was part of the 18 fences of Shammai, wasn't it?
I don't remember, what group that promoted it, but it
was a perversion, not an actual commandment, but a perversion of a commandment. Because it was to my understanding, the reason why I'm saying that, it was to my understanding that, and I could be wrong on this, but when he talked about the handwritings of ordinances that was against us, wasn't it what he was talking about in Ezekiel 18:4? It says, the soul that sins, he shall die, and that we are all condemned. But through the blood of Yeshua Messiah, then we are set free from that law of sin and ordinances when we repent.
Well, the way that Paul wrote this, it's commandments contained in ordinances. I don't believe that's God's ordinances, because it created a wall of separation.
Gotcha.
And so we're going to see, and it's a legitimate question, because how do we answer Exodus chapter 12? When it says, no uncircumcised male shall eat of the Passover. Okay, so let's go to Galatians for a minute here. I'm not trying to avoid to answer your question fully, but it's apparent that the Jews had in their teachings that they built these walls of separation. Is that clear? Do you believe the Jews had built walls of separation, and that was preventing them, because Peter had to be rebuked, because he would be conversing with the Gentiles, and then when some of his Jewish brothers would come around, he'd see them, and he would kind of, oops, I better not be talking to the Gentiles in front of my brothers, and he got rebuked for it. Okay, that wasn't in God's commandments. That law was not.
Absolutely. But when it says that they were abolished, the only hang up that I have, and I'm not saying that I'm right or anything on this, why would you have to abolish something that was falsehood to begin with? If
Well,
it's
it was a teaching that was
Right, right.
wrong, and it mentioned there in Ephesians it created hostility. These ordinances created hostility between the Jews and the Gentiles,
right.
and so let's I'm gonna take your attention now to Galatians, and there was in Galatians. It mentions in verse 6 of chapter 1, he says, I marvel that you're so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of the Messiah unto another gospel, which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of the good news. So here's a perversion kind of similar to what you're talking about, but this is a perversion of the truth, the gospel, okay? And so he goes on. And for the sake of time, I'm going to have to kind of jump forward here to chapter 2. Paul says, then 14 years after, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas and took Titus with me. And I went up by revelation and communicated unto them the good news which I preach among the Gentiles, but privately to them which were of reputation, lest by any means I should run or had run in vain. But neither Titus was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. So again, we don't have the specific issue, the question that he's answering, but we have the answer. So it gives us, again, a clue to what the issue is. So the issue here, again, has something to do with circumcision. And if you remember, I mentioned earlier how Peter was rebuked. That's mentioned here in verse 11, where Peter was come to Antioch, and Paul says, I withstood him to his face because he was to be blamed. For before that certain came from James, he did eat with Gentiles, but when they were come, his Jewish brethren, he would withdraw and separate himself, fearing them which were of the circumcision. Okay, so we see this issue is still going on in the assembly. Okay, now, so I'm going to direct your attention to the screen up here. Okay, Galatians. I guess what we'll start in verse or chapter 3, 17 through 19. How much time do we got? We got about a half an hour. Okay. And Paul says, "In this I say that the covenant that was confirmed before of God the Messiah, the law, which was 430 years after, cannot disannul or cannot change, that it should be made, that it should make the promise of none effect. For if inheritance be of the law, it is no more of promise, but God gave it to Abraham by promise. Wherefore then serveth the law? It was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come to whom the promise was made. And it was ordained by angels in the hand of a mediator." So Paul makes a specific reference to a law that was added 430 years after. Now we know that Paul's dealing with this issue of circumcision, this issue in Acts 15, with these sects still spreading this false teaching that the Gentiles had to be physically circumcised to be saved. That's the issue Paul's dealing with here. And so he mentions this law that was added 430 years after. So what law was that? And where did it begin? 430 years after what? Well, it gives us a clue here that it was a law that was added 430 years, let's see. Actually, the clue is going to be in another text. But before I go there, what law was added 430 years after? There's only 4 places in the Bible that mentions the 430 years. Okay, there's only 4 places. Pardon? Okay. So where do we read that? Exodus chapter 12. Okay, so somebody read that. Exodus chapter 12. Because it mentions 430 years actually to the day. Verse 40, go ahead and read it.
Now the time that Ben Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. So it happened at the end of 430 years, so the very day that the armies of Adonai went out from the land of Egypt. It was the night watching for Adonai to bring them out of the land of Egypt. The same night for the Virgil Adonai for Israel throughout the generations.
Okay, so mine says, now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. Mm-hmm. The sojourning, okay. Were they actually in Egypt 430 years?
No.
So why did it just say that they were in Egypt 430 years? It says, it actually says that the sojournings of the children of Israel in Egypt was 430 years. So sojourning, so what's the definition of sojourning? A journey? So it's going back to something that happened 430 years to the day. That event is in Genesis chapter 12. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 12. If you have a timetable in your Bible, mine does, 430 years from the exodus out of Egypt takes you to Genesis chapter 12. And it was a promise that was given to Abraham. And what was that promise? What was the promise given to Abraham? Brian. Indirectly, yeah. It says, now Yahweh said to Abraham, get you out of your country, from your kindred, and from your father's house unto a land that I will show you. I propose to you, this was the beginning of the sojourning of the children of Israel, because who was the father of Israel? So, in my timeline, again, takes me back to that when Abraham was given that promise is 430 years. So Abraham's given a promise, but he says, get you out of the house. You're going to begin a journey to a land that I'm going to show you, okay? And I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless you. I will curse him that curse you. And in thee all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And what was that? What does he mean by in you shall all the earth be blessed? The promise, that was the promised seed. That was the promise of the Messiah. If you go to Genesis 26, 4, he says, and Yahweh appeared, this is to Abraham. Let's see. It was in the days of Abraham, Isaac, and no, this is Isaac went unto Abimelech. I'm hoping I got my notes correct. He says, yeah, this was a time when Isaac was going down to Egypt. And he says, sojourn in this land, and I will be with you, and I will bless you, for unto you and unto your seed I will give all these countries, and I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham. And I will make your seed multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give you unto your seed all these countries, and in thy seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice, kept my charge and my commandments and statutes. So basically it's a repeat of the promise he gave to Abraham in chapter 12. So he gave this promise to Abraham that through his seed the Messiah would come. Does everybody see that? Okay. Now what was the sign of that promise given to Abraham? Circumcision. So again, what's this whole purpose of circumcision? So circumcision wasn't before Abraham, so does that mean everybody born before Abraham, every male, will not enter into the land because they weren't physically circumcised? What do you do with all those people? So this was a sign given to Abraham that through your seed, not many but one, the Messiah shall come. So it's kind of like it's one of these signs to prove who the Messiah was. Okay, does everybody agree with that? But it had to come through Abraham's seed, and the enemy, I believe the enemy kind of knew this because he's been trying to destroy Abraham's seed since the beginning of time. All right? When they were in Egypt, all the male children were supposed to be, thrown in the river. So, and just to show how important it was to keep that physical seed line going, does anybody remember what Judah's daughter-in-law, Tamar, did in order to keep that? Do you realize that if Tamar, I know it seems odd that she had a husband given to her by Judah. We know that the Messiah came through the line of Judah. And that son died, didn't give her any seed. Then his brother took her. He spilled the seed on the ground, if I remember right. He ended up dying. And he had one more son, but he was pretty young. And so she was waiting. And she realized it wasn't going to happen. So if she hadn't have done what she did, the seed line would have been broken. So that's how important this physical seed line was. That's how important circumcision was. Okay, it was what I would label today, in today's term, like a tracking number. When you have a package that you order a package and they assign a tracking number so you can track from the very beginning of the sojourning of that package until it arrives, that package is assigned a number, okay? So the Messiah, in the same way, Yahweh gave this sign to Abraham that through your circumcised seed, the Messiah will come, okay? So that was very important. So when Paul said up here let's get this. He said, so what serves the law? It was added because of transgression till the seed should come. Who's that seed? To whom the promise was made. So, and this law was added 430 years after. So I submit to you that law that we read in Exodus chapter 12 was this. That law that was added. Because why was it so important that the writer was inspired to write 430 years to the day that they came out of Egypt? And what day was that they came out of Egypt? It's a Passover. Actually, they began their journey out on Passover Day, and I believe they started their journey on that night after Passover was over, and then beginning the 15th, okay? So 430, and then so Paul mentions this was a law that was added 430 years after the promise given to Abraham, and that law was, as we read, let me go to it now. He says, in verse 40 of 12, now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years, and it came to pass at the end of 430 years to the selfsame day that all the host of Yahweh went out from Egypt. It's a night to be much remembered. And then drop down. Oh, in verse 43 it says, and Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron, this is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof, but every man's servant that is bought for money, when you have circumcised him, then he shall eat. So this was the law that I believe that Paul is referencing because it all deals with circumcision. The whole book of Galatians is about circumcision. So, and he concludes this. If you go to the end of the book of Galatians, he sums up the whole book of Galatians. He says in verse 12, I'll start in verse 10. He says, as we have therefore opportunity, I'm in Galatians 6, chapter 10, As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are the household of faith. And you see how a large letter I have written unto you with mine own hand. As many as desire to make a fair show in the flesh, they constrain you to be circumcised. What was the issue in Acts 15? It was that sect that was saying that the Gentiles had to be physically circumcised to be saved, to inherit the promises given to Abraham. In the book of Romans, Paul makes the case. He's making this same argument in Romans. He says, was Abraham saved in circumcision by faith or uncircumcision? He was saved by faith while he was yet uncircumcised. And so Paul's making that case that, hey, look, to be partakers of the promises to Abraham through the Messiah, you don't have to be physically circumcised. It was important up until the seed that came to whom the promise was made, because that was the sign of who the Messiah would be. And that's why Paul says that the law was added because of transgressions until the seed should come to whom the promise was made. Now, when did that promise to Abraham, when was it completely fulfilled? What day did he fulfill that promise? Passover. So make the connections here. The time that Israel began their sojournings, starting with Father Abraham, was on a Passover day. Because 430 years later, to the day they came out was a Passover day. The day it was fulfilled, the promise to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12 was fulfilled 2,000 years ago on a Passover day. That was the important element and purpose of physical circumcision. And when was circumcision supposed to be given to the male? Did he have any decision in that process? So again, it was extremely important up until the Messiah came and fulfilled his purpose, because that was the sign that the Messiah would come through Abraham's seed. So, should we still circumcise males today? Absolutely. But not for the sake of the original purpose, because the Messiah has come, okay? So partaking of, in the feast days, as Paul said in the book of Colossians, don't judge somebody, a Gentile, a believer that's not circumcised, for coming and keeping these feasts and the festivals. He doesn't, because baptism is like a form of circumcision, because he mentions that they were all baptized in the sea when Israel went through the Red Sea. It was like a form of baptism. You know, they went down in the water, they came up. You know, Yeshua went down in the grave, he came up. It all symbolizes the death, burial, and resurrection. And so Paul makes the case, yeah, circumcision was important, but once it served its purpose, it's no longer necessary because the Messiah has come. We're not waiting for another Messiah to come. Okay, so, but the whole key here in Galatians chapter 3 was it was a law that was added 430 years after. The law of the Ten Commandments was in place well before they came out of Egypt. It was, I believe it was established in the garden, okay? Sacrifices and offerings was established well before they came out of Egypt. And those are the two main laws that get lumped into the law that was done away with in Galatians, okay? And it wasn't. It wasn't. That's not the law that Paul was referring to in Galatians, okay? And did I finish Galatians chapter 3 or 6? No. I don't think I did. So as I read verse 12, so Paul's reiterating the issue. As many as desire to make a fair show in the flesh, this sect of Pharisees, they constrain you to be circumcised, only lest they should suffer persecution for the cross of Messiah. For neither they themselves who are circumcised keep the Torah, because obviously they had issues in relationships with their brothers, okay? But they desire to have you circumcised, that they may glory in your flesh. But God forbid that I should glory, save in the cross of our Lord or Master Yeshua Messiah, by whom the world is crucified unto me, and I unto the world. For in the Messiah Yeshua neither circumcision availeth, nor anything or uncircumcision, but a new creature. Keeping the commandments of God, having that heart to want to follow him and put off the sins of the flesh. That's what's important, not the physical circumcision. And as many as walk according to this rule, peace be upon them and mercy upon the Israel of God. So, back to my original story for trying to delve into this topic, it all started because the book of Romans and Galatians were the two main books people used to say the Torah was done away with. And they don't understand the context. The context was one very narrow issue, and Acts 15 that Aaron brought up is the backdrop to the issue that Paul dealt with in almost every letter. Almost every one of Paul's letters, if my memory serves me correct, he deals with this topic of circumcision was in there. And he mentions there in Galatians 3 that this is but a man's covenant. So he's I don't know how many hints he can give us, and we don't always put the pieces of the puzzle together. Okay, so does that make sense? I have a whole study on it if you're interested in it, but sorry, I spent a lot of time on that, but it goes to answer the very first question that was asked, but do you see how this sect of Pharisees had a legitimate question? Hey, the Torah says, and so they came together and they had a council, and that's when I believe that Yahweh showed up and said, here, let me help you understand the whole purpose. God gives us instructions, and there's a purpose and function for every instruction he gives us. And so with that said, I'll open up the floor to comments. So we have Dean over here.
I just want to go back to Acts 15 real quick and read a couple verses. I enjoy this conversation a lot. Well, I did want to say, the whole circumcision conversation was a conversation that was had before Messiah was even born. The Alexandrian school of thought, the Jerusalem school of thought, and all of those things. And this is just really clearing up an argument that predates Messiah. But I just want to mention the Holy Spirit in all of this. It says, now the apostles, in verse 6, now the apostles and elders came together to consider this matter. And when there had been much dispute, Peter rose up and said to them, men and brethren, you know that a good while ago God chose among us that by my mouth the Gentiles should hear the word of the gospel and believe. So God, who knows the heart, acknowledged them by giving them the Holy Spirit, just as he did to us, and made no distinction between us and them, purifying their hearts by faith. I think the Spirit is what, and it's going right along with what you've been saying, it's the Spirit then which changes the life. It's the Spirit that is the seal and guarantee of our salvation that gives us the strength, the courage, the grace to then keep the law. The law never saved anyone. It's that Spirit that then comes in, and I think, that's just my thoughts on it. When we have that proclamation of faith and that Spirit comes in, whether Jew or Greek, whether Jew or Gentile, he's the one that transforms the life to lead us into his truth and all of those things. But yeah, I love the Spirit aspect of it.
And I also want to mention that if you feel convicted, this is for the men who feel that it's important to have it done if it wasn't when you were a baby, that's good too. That's fine too. Okay, it's just not necessary for salvation. You're not going to be kicked out of the kingdom for it. And we do have two examples in the Bible where, like Titus, we just read in Galatians, Titus wasn't compelled to be circumcised, but there was another case where there was. And I think Paul went ahead and they went ahead and had the circumcision done just to prove to the Jews that, hey, we're not totally against following the law of Moses, okay? So you have both examples. Don't just pick one and create a doctrine off of one. You got to put them both together and explain, okay, why is there a difference here? And it all goes back to context. Any other comments? Got one back here. Got Mary Sorry, ladies, this is kind of a man's discussion, but so.
So the instance of Timothy that you spoke of, it says he was in our translation. It says he was circumcised because of the Jews, but the actual Greek can actually be translated as he was circumcised by the Jews. So I would assume that if you're getting that kind of thing done, you'd want it done by somebody who's a professional that knows what they're doing. So we get it translated as it only had to be because of the Jews, because they were worried that the Jews would think there's a problem with it. But actually in the Greek, if you look into it, it can be translated as by them. Okay, so just clarification there. And what it comes down to, the way I look at all this stuff, what it comes down to is, what does circumcision signify spiritually? Right, circumcision of the heart. Well, circumcision of the heart is meaning that your heart is obedient, right? So it all comes down to are we fighting against the commands because we just don't want to do them, or do we have an obedient heart that says, Lord, even if I don't understand this, I'm going to do it because I trust you?
And as a man, I'd much rather have it done when I'm 8 days old than 48 years old. By somebody that knows what they're doing. Yeah, Mary had a comment.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm trying to understand all of this also, and I'm a Gentile believer in Yeshua, and I try to follow like the first half of the first century believers, Gentile believers in Yeshua. And so I've been baptized into the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, Yeshua. And by God's grace, I keep the 10 Commandments, which is his covenant. I gave up Sunday worship in 1996. And I do not observe Easter, which that's a pagan holiday that around the time of Constantine, the Council of Nicaea came up with the date that they wanted to observe Easter every year. So, I keep the seventh-day Sabbath according to the commandments. And your group here is one of not very many in the area that keeps the seventh-day Sabbath. So I come here mainly for that and fellowship. And as far as the feast days, I certainly would not tell anyone not to observe them if they so feel. But I don't know that it's a problem, but maybe my issue is, telling a Gentile believer that they have to, or that they should keep the feasts. So that's just kind of where I am right now.
Yeah. So if you read in our bulletin, I think it's very important that we all practice this, that to respect individual conscience and conviction. Because at the end of the day, you got to stand before the judge. So with that said, we respect that, your position, and we should respect everybody's position. Now, if we want to look at, well, what does Yahweh require of the Gentiles? And we have to do this gracefully. The Bible says, let all your words be seasoned with grace. But we read in here in Exodus chapter 12 that there is how many laws? For the Jews and the nations. In 49, one law shall be to him that is a homeborn and under the stranger that sojourns among you. And the gospel, Yahweh's commands have always been open to the nations. It's just that when the nations wanted to come in and to learn about the God of Israel, they had to assimilate to be part of that. And the feast days, in the book of Ezekiel, it talks about the Gentiles a lot. In fact, let me go to, I think it's in Isaiah, and somebody can jump in here too, but I believe it's in the book of Isaiah, a chapter around 50.
I do have a couple comments, Mike, when you're done.
Okay, let's see. I have a page that got ripped out of my Bible by my grandson when he was just a little kid, and it's Isaiah 56, one of the best chapters. Okay. I'm in chapter 56 of Isaiah. And he's talking about how his salvation is near to come and his righteousness to be revealed. And he mentions in verse 4, let me just read. I'll just read starting in verse 1. Thus says Yahweh, keep your judgment and do justice, for my salvation is near to come and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man that does this, and the son of man that lays hold on it, that keeps the Sabbath from polluting it, and keeps his hand from doing any evil. Neither let the son of the stranger that hath joined himself to Yahweh speak, saying, surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. And like I say, my Bible's ripped, my page is ripped, and it's in two pieces here. Yet we did esteem him strict, smitten of God, and afflicted. Thank you. That's right where its rip is. For our transgressions. Boy, it's all messed up here. Sorry. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we were healed. And all we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and Yahweh hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. Let me jump down. Let's see. I think I might have to continue on to another chapter. What I'm looking for is, I'm in chapter 50. I was in chapter 53. I told you 56. Yeah. Now I'm in 56. This is where my page got ripped out, and so 56 is what I wanted to. I wanted to finish up. So I read that in verse 6. I read that. Verse 7. Even them I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. But the text I was looking for, it doesn't just refer to one Sabbath for them to keep, but it mentions the word Sabbath as a plural, and that's the one I was kind of looking for. And these Sabbaths in Leviticus 23, it mentions the weekly Sabbath. It mentions the feast day Sabbaths for Israel to keep. And these holy convocations, this is the point I want to make. The Sabbath, weekly Sabbath, the feast day Sabbaths in his feast, they're holy convocations. One of the Hebrew words used for convocation is mikra. It's a calling out, a place of meeting. and also a rehearsal. So the feast days are a rehearsal for the coming millennial kingdom. And I think was it in Colossians where it mentions that these are a shadow of things to come. We're rehearsing for those events, and that's why in Colossians, Paul says that, to the Gentiles, don't let anybody condemn you for keeping the Sabbaths, and the eating of meats and the offerings during those feasts. He says, don't let no man condemn you. So there's verses, a lot more verses that show that the nations, the strangers, are invited to participate because of one law. There's one law for the homeborn and one law for the stranger. And so I think we can make and why would they not want to go to a wedding rehearsal? These are all wedding rehearsals, the feast days in my mind, for that great wedding feast. And you've been invited to wedding rehearsals before. Would it not be how would the bridegroom and groom, how would they feel if he didn't come to the wedding rehearsal? So they all point to the Messiah and what he did for us. So that's why I think it's important that we share that with them. But again, it's really their decision. But it's a wedding rehearsal. If you look at it that way, that's one thing that really stuck with me when I understood these holy convocations as a rehearsal. So I know I kind of ran over time a little bit. We got a comment back here.
Okay, so Yaz convicted me I'm making a concise paper on some of this, who are we when we believe? Okay, who do we become? We actually cease becoming of the nations, and we become part of Israel when we believe. So it's one of those things where we've got it drilled into our mind that we are, quote, Gentile believers, but that's actually not true. Caleb was actually a Canaanite. Okay, Caleb became of the tribe of Judah, right? So Caleb was. It's kind of funny because Caleb in Hebrew means what? Dog. That's what they call the Canaanites. Okay, so he was one of the two that was allowed into the kingdom, into the promised land after the spies and after the people rebelled and didn't listen, right? So what it is Ruth, she was a Moabitess. What does it say about the Moabites? Are they allowed in to God's congregation or into the temple? No. But when they become a believer, when she made that profession, your God will be my God, your people will be my people, she ceased becoming a Moabitess, and became a child of God and an Israelite. She was adopted. Paul says that you were adopted as sons, right? You were grafted into the tree. You don't, when you're adopted as a son, do you obey the rules of the household that you're adopted into or your old household? So these are things that, and I'm not saying this to drill anyone, to beat on anyone, but what I'm saying is these themes are all over Scripture. You cease being part of the nations and you start becoming part of his house. So then we are to obey the house rules. And he will work on people's hearts as he works on their hearts. Whatever things are the most offensive to him at the moment that is an idol in your life or is a problem in your life, he's going to address that and convict you of it first, what to obey. But it really comes down to he is our Messiah, and if he is our Messiah, he is of Israel, and so we follow is the Israel of God, right?
And in Zechariah 14 is a prophecy of the millennial kingdom that mentions that when Yeshua is reigning and ruling from Jerusalem, that the nations that do not come up to keep his feasts, there'll be no rain on their crops. So he invites all the nations, and I truly believe when he brought Israel out of Egypt that he was hoping that the Egyptians would see that Yahweh was the only true God, because he did that, I believe, systematically destroyed all their beliefs in their pagan gods through the plagues, that in hopes of that. Well, I think he did say that they will know that I am Yahweh that brought you out of the land of Egypt. They will. And there was a mixed multitude that came out with them. So I have to believe that there was Egyptians that did become converted and left with them, because I don't know who else would be part of that mixed multitude. We got another comment back here.
Yeah, and also in Revelation, how many gates is there, and what are the names on the gates?
I'll try to make this quick, but I'm just backing up what Nick said and kind of a different view on it. When you go into the Feast of Booths in Leviticus 23:42, it says, "You shall dwell in booths for 7 days. All native Israelites shall dwell in booths." So, came across this verse, and the question comes up is like, okay, so us being of the Gentiles, are we to observe Sukkot? Because it says here for the native Israelites. But Mike already touched on it. The Exodus out of Egypt had a mixed multitude, and the ones that left, my understanding is, it was those who partook in the Passover, put the blood up over their doorposts. So that was, my understanding is that wasn't only the quote-unquote Jews, but it was those all who believed in what Moses was saying and believed in the God of Israel. They did that. They were a part of the Exodus. And then when you get to Mount Sinai, it does talk about there was a mixed multitude at the base of Mount Sinai. And then at a certain point, it stops calling them a mixed multitude. And then they are then called the children of Israel, or the promised ones that God has brought out. And to add to that, later in the scriptures, it talks about that there was a quarrel between a native, somebody who is bloodline of Israel, and then somebody who is born of an Egyptian woman get into a quarrel, and one kills another, but they are still Israel. It just says, hey, it just kind of planes this out, puts this out there. So my understanding is that once you become a believer, you're born again, and you partake in Passover, that is a covenantal meal. And from that point on, then you are referred to, it's not salvation that comes before, as soon as you believe and confess. But the Passover is a covenantal meal that you are regarded as a native born. So it doesn't necessarily mean by blood, it's just, are you in covenant with Yahweh?
Thank you, Brian. Any other comments? We have another one. Okay. Mary, over here. Our main service starts in 18 minutes, so we have to close up pretty quick.
Thank you. Just a continuation of what Nick said about in Revelation 21, the 12 gates correspond to the 12 tribes, and then in verse 14 it says the 12 foundations correspond to the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So there is some kind of a distinction there, just in people, I think, not in whether they obviously believed in Yeshua. That's all I have for now.
All right. Well, thank you for everybody for your comments and sticking it out this long. But again, if you have any questions to the topic today, just let me know. Again, I have a whole study on the book of Galatians, and specifically one entitled, What Law Was Added 430 Years After. So I think if you're interested, I do have that. Thank you.